And the thing is that ultimately I think the taxpayers deserve better.
Let me just because the ranking member and I disagree as to the cooperation that we received from the SBA. Just to try to set the record straight, the previous administration, the Trump administration, made certain determinations in regards to PPP loan applications, consistent with the law passed by Congress, because I was part of the drafting, as was Senator Shaheen, along with Senator Rubio and Senator Collins. And we did provide for nonprofits. That was one of the issues we talked about. And we did provide that those who have arrangements with similar groups are not necessarily disqualified. Depends upon the affiliate rules that are used by the SBA. The Trump administration processed those loans and allowed those loans to go forward. Then, I believe it was in January, but I'm not sure of the exact date, but there was a letter sent out to Planned Parenthood by the Trump administration that was somewhat of a perplexing letter because it said they questioned their eligibility. Please send back the money or tell us why you are eligible. Each of the Planned Parenthood organizations that wanted to proceed with the loan sent back a letter saying, we fully comply, et cetera. They sent a letter back. No further action was taken by the Trump administration. The Trump administration also put a hold on about 400 organizations that had questionable or had further explore whether they were qualified for affiliation or not. When the Biden administration came in, they released the holds, as I understand it, on the 400 organizations, saying if they comply, and there's a standard procedures for determining affiliation based upon control, they would be able to be eligible. If they didn't, they weren't. There was no change in policy. There was no change in policy by the Trump administration. There was no change in policy by the Biden administration. We have tried on several occasions, working with the administrator, to get all the information to every member of this committee. What the administration cannot provide is proprietary information on individual applications, which is standard practice of privacy. And secondly, they can't provide information that doesn't exist. And since there's no change in policy, there is no documentation of a change in policy. So I don't know how much more we can do on this. I've tried to provide as much information as possible. And let me just remind the ranking member, this all started with the deputy administrator, and we made arrangements for separate meetings to provide a substantial amount of information about the deputy administrator, which is privacy information. We made it available so every member of this committee could see it. I share the ranking member's desire for total transparency. I think the administration has provided that in regards to the request that you have made. Just really wanted to put that on the record.
One quick point. When we did finally get the information on the person that had been nominated, they said, oh, well, we'll review this in private. Same goes for any of this. It could be, any of the Planned Parenthood stuff could be reviewed in private as well if you don't want it out on the front page of the newspaper. But the thing is not revealing. There is an argument that goes back and forth on what is an affiliated group and what is a big business and what is a small business. I don't think that's a proprietary sort of argument. And if it is, then I don't know how we would ever do oversight. You know, what if, an enormous Standard Oil of 1911 wants to be a small business? Wouldn't we want to see what their arguments are on why they're a small business or why they're a large business and they get small business loans? So I really think that argumentation back and forth from the advocate of the person who says, I'm not a big business, I'm a small business, I just don't understand how that can be proprietary.
I think we're having trouble interpretation here. The rules for affiliation are well documented by the SBA. There's specific guidelines that need to be followed in regards to satisfying the affiliation rules. And in each of the applications that was verified. I don't know what else we can say other than that. Some of the information in verification could be proprietary, but I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for. Maybe I'm confused.
Well, what happened is the Trump administration said they were a big business. The Biden administration says they're a small business. So said they were disqualified under the Trump administration, then they're qualified under the Biden administration. And so there was argumentation, we assume, made by Planned Parenthood through communications sent back to Small Business Administration and say, hey, we think this is a wrong decision. We don't want to send our money back. I think some of them actually sent their money back, and I think they should be honest with us. Did some Planned Parenthood send their money back? Will you answer that question?
If I just respond to that, and then you let the administrator respond. I think you are making an assumption about the Trump administration, which is not accurate, and maybe you need information from the Trump administration. The Trump administration processed the loans. There is no indication that they had specific information to request this money back. The letters went out without documentation from the Trump administration, not the Biden administration. So I think maybe it's the Trump administration you're trying to get the information from, which has not been an easy task for members of Congress to get information out of the Trump.
No, this is information we know exists. It's from the lawyers and or advocates for Planned Parenthood. These letters went back and forth. So Small Business Administration said, you're not qualified, send the money back. Then they said, oh, no, we're qualified, and these are our arguments. Those arguments should be public record, and we should be able to see what are the arguments for, you're right, the rules should be fairly clear. What is an affiliate, their longstanding rules, but that should be out in the open. And, it's sort of like, are you a contractor or an employee? There's a whole checklist of things you look at, but we would want to know what are the argumentation, because there are people who believe that Planned Parenthood, one, has the same legal defense for all of their affiliates, has the same sort of set of rules, and there is evidence that Planned Parenthood cannot make individual decisions without permission from the parent company. So there are arguments, at least on the side of them, being considered to be a big business, not a small business. But even if we lose that debate, we would want to see what was the debate, what was the discussion back and forth, because they did reverse the Trump decision not to give them the money, and then they gave them the money.
So I think the confusion here, and then we'll go to questioning, I think the confusion is that the determinations were made by the Trump administration. The Biden administration released the holds. They looked at the records that were submitted, the information that was submitted. There was not a hearing. There was not a discussion. This was paper being processed. Remember, we're talking about, in this case,
11.
hundreds of loans. There's not a day set aside for argument. It's a processor at SBA looking at the material submitted by the applicant to see whether they comply with the test. I assume that's the process that was used. So
Correct.
That's the documentation. There is no verbal documentations here. This was a processing process. So I think that's our confusion. And the confusion where we seem to be at deadlock is that the original determination was made by the Trump administration. There is no documentation for why that letter was sent out asking for the money back, but it never was implemented because they didn't follow up after the reply was sent in by Planned Parenthood. Then comes in the Biden administration. They're looking at this in puzzlement because they have 400 that are in this category, and only Planned Parenthood got the letters. They don't understand why. What the administration does, I think is the right thing, is they tell the processors, check to make sure they qualify under our rules based upon the information that's been submitted.
Don't you think that decision-making process involved reading the advocates for Planned Parenthood's arguments for why they are a small business, not a big business?
You may have read the correspondence, but
that's what I mean. So that correspondence would be the advocacy, and while there might not be a deliberative process where they say why, we would see the argumentation both for and against, or at least for why they are a small business, but we're being prevented from seeing Planned Parenthood's argumentation for why they are a small business.
If I'm right, I think I might be wrong on this, but I think one of the Planned Parenthood released their letter. I might be wrong on that.
The Small Business Administration hasn't released any.
But one of the Planned Parenthood groups did release it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Hirono, you're next.
Oh, thank you, as it turns out. So obviously, we're not going to resolve this matter. And for all the time that I have been